Studies at the University of Macau. Today, it is my great pleasure to introduce to you Professor Tongdong Bai. Professor Bai is the Dongfang Chair, Professor of Philosophy at Fudan University in China. He's an internationally renowned scholar of Chinese philosophy, political philosophy, the intersection of these fields, having authored a number of books on these topics, most recently, a book by the provocative title, Against Political Equality, The Confucian Case. Today, though, Professor Bai will be discussing a somewhat different matter with us. He'll be discussing the philosophy of the philosopher Han Fei. The title of today's talk, How to Follow the Fact of Human Beings and Herd the Masses. Now, just before I hand things over to Professor Bai, one very short procedural note. Professor Bai has asked me to give him an audible interruption at about 55 minutes or so. Is that what we agreed? Just in case you're still speaking? Right. Yeah. So I might rudely say 55 minutes in the middle of a paragraph or sentence or something of that sort. So please don't think I'm being tyrannical if that happens. But at any rate, if you could all now join me in welcoming Professor Bai, I will hand things over.
Hey, thank you so much for the invitation. And so it's I feel a little bit bad that we have to do it online. I really wish to go back to Macau sometimes because I really love the avatars there. And so Ben already introduced today's talk. So I have an outline for today's talk, but it's in Chinese. So I'll share the screen. So for those of you who can read Chinese, you can take a look at the outline. But I'll do the talk in English. So I'm going to share the screen now. Okay. So. Yeah, so okay, let me just move the screen around so that I can see it myself. Okay, so so the talk is really about Han Fei's view of human nature. For those of you who are not familiar with Chinese philosophy, so Han Fei lived around, say, 250 BCE, right before the state of Qin conquered all other states and ended the so-called warring states period of China and unified China again and established a centralized bureaucracy. And the very institution of centralized bureaucracy is really based on so-called legalist ideas. And Han Fei is often called a legalist. Of course, a lot of sinologists would have problem with this term, legalism or legalist, but I think it's a convenient category to use. So I think a key idea from the legalist is centralized bureaucracy, and I think the state of Qin, when it unified China, established the centralized bureaucracy in China. And just kind of like a side note here, because I mean, according to Max Weber, the German sociologist, centralized bureaucracy, or actually rational bureaucracy, is a key feature of modernity. As a result, the American political scientist Francis Fukuyama, in one of his most recent books, The Origins of Political Orders, said that according to Max Weber's, based on Max Weber's criteria of modernity, the state of Qin would be the first political modern state in human history. And in that sense, because Han Fei really offers the theoretical foundation for rational bureaucracy. In that sense, we could call Han Fei the first the first modern political philosopher in human history. And Han Fei is often compared with Machiavelli and Hobbes. And then comparison is also very telling because according to some political theorists, Machiavelli and Hobbes started the project of modernity from a philosophical perspective. So then if Machiavelli and Hobbes were responsible philosophically for modernity, then there's one more corroboration of the idea that Han Fei's philosophy is really modern in that sense. And there's even one more interesting comparison. The most famous or maybe infamous book by Machiavelli is The Prince. And Han Feizi is actually he is a prince, of course, not in the kind of Machiavellian sense. By the prince, Machiavelli really meant the ruler, and Han Feizi is a princeling. He's a prince. He's a descendant of the king's family of the state of Han, one of the 7 strong states. But among the 7, state of Han is the weakest, and is about to be eliminated, conquered by the state of Qin. And so that's Han Feizi, the person. He's a princeling, and he was from the state of Han, and his state was in danger of being annihilated by other powerful states, in particular the state of Qin. So he tried to persuade the king, his own king, the king of Han, to adopt his proposal, but he failed. But he didn't totally fail. Rather, a king, finally he got the king's ear. Unfortunately, it's not the ear of the king of Han, rather is the king of Qin, who later unified China, becomes the first emperor. Because allegedly, according to Shiji, the grand historian, the records of the grand historian Sima Qian, a few hundred years later, the king of Qin, the first emperor, read 2 chapters from the Han Feizi, or maybe back then there was no the Han Feizi. The book doesn't appear in the book form yet. So he wrote 2 pieces, and he really loved them, and he said, according to Shiji, that if I can make this person my companion, I can die, right after this person becomes a companion. And Li Si, one of his ministers, later became his prime minister, said to the king that I know this guy, this is Han Feizi. And as a result, the king of Qin waged a war against the state of Han with one condition: give me Han Feizi. I always like to mention this story because it's really it's very kind of exciting story to a political theorist, because I think this is probably the best treatment a political theorist has ever got throughout human history, right? I always like to draw this comparison. Just imagine, when Trump was still the president, he said, he told the president of China that the reason he waged the trade war against China was that he really wanted to get Professor Bai Tongdong, right? This political theorist. So it's really a great honor to a political theorist. But when the state of Han couldn't resist the attack, so they gave up Han Feizi. But then Li Si regretted about this, because he knew Han Feizi was much more brilliant than he was. So he really conspired with some others against Han Feizi, and Han Feizi was ordered to commit suicide by the king. So Han Feizi in real life is really a tragic figure of failure. So his ideas were not put into practice, but in theory, as already mentioned, he was responsible for the kind of rational bureaucracy Qin had, which was crucial for the state of Qin to unify China. So that's a little bit background. And today, the focus of this talk is on his view of human nature, which is basis really for his construction of rational bureaucracy. And before I go into the topic per se, I have to first make a clarification. When we talk about Han Fei's view of human nature, the typical, the mainstream understanding, maybe the lack of understanding, is that Han Fei's view of human nature is exactly the same as his alleged teachers. So Han Feizi has a famous teacher, allegedly Xunzi, the Confucian thinker, one of the most important Confucian thinkers in that period. And allegedly Han Feizi studied with Xunzi, and Xunzi famously has this view: human beings are born to be bad. And by bad, really, Xunzi meant that we are profit-driven creatures. And so the common perception is that Han Feizi, followed his teacher precisely on this point. He also considered human beings are born to bad, so that's the common view of Han Fei's idea of human nature. However, before I talk about Han Fei's view of human nature directly, I have to make a clarification, namely the very idea that Han Feizi got his view of human nature from Xunzi is extremely dubious, right? That idea is based on this view that Han Feizi studied with Xunzi. However, if you look at the historical records, there's only one line from historical records that testified to this claim. This one line is from Shi Ji, the record of grand historian. A few hundred years later, the line reads, Han Feizi and Li Si, the guy who said he knew Han Feizi, Han Feizi and Li Si, both of them, served Master Xun, Xunzi. So there's only one line that support this idea, but this is a line from Sima Qian a few hundred years later, right? And so it's very thin evidence that Han Feizi was a pupil of Xunzi. And in contrast, the evidence that Li Si, the minister, later the prime minister, Li Si studied with Xunzi is much stronger, because the line that Han Feizi studied with Xunzi is only from the biography of Han Feizi. But Li Si studied with Xunzi. It is from the biography of both both Li Si and Xunzi, right? So there are two sources to support the idea that Li Si studied with Xunzi. And also in the Xunzi, in the book itself, Xunzi mentioned Li Si as one of his pupils, right? And so that's the first thing I like to mention. The claim that Han Feizi studied with Xunzi has very thin evidence, at least not as thick as the claim that Li Si studied with Xunzi. I think even more importantly, even if Han Feizi studied with Xunzi, the teacher-pupil relation doesn't support the idea that the pupil got some ideas from the teacher. I mean, most of us are teachers here, right? We know that a lot of our students don't get anything from us, right? We're just misunderstand our teaching completely. So oftentimes, I think in the literature, the scholars confuse teacher-pupil relation with the kind of intellectual heritage. So in order for two people to have some kind of intellectual heritage, for example, Han Feizi learned, adopted his view of human nature from Xunzi, that kind of claim actually has to have a few important elements. First of all, sufficient evidence of teacher-pupil relation, which is lacking actually in the case between Han Feizi and Xunzi. Secondly, their views are close enough, right? Thirdly, the similarities between their views come from the teacher-pupil relations, and they cannot come from some, especially the pupil's view cannot come from some other people. Or the view is just so commonplace, the pupil can discover it by himself, right? Or actually maybe the reason this pupil become this teacher's pupil is that he discovered that his teacher had a view similar to the one he already had, right? So in that sense, to prove intellectual heritage, is really very challenging and very difficult, especially in the case of Han Feizi and Xunzi, who lived more than 2,000 years ago, and the independent documents are not very sufficient, right? And I think, in this discussion, I think one thing become clear is that, in order to show intellectual heritage, a crucial thing is to show their views in question are quite similar to each other, right? Unfortunately, I think all the talks about their teacher-pupil relations don't clarify the issue, only make the discussion rather bad. Oftentimes, if you read the literature, when they talk about, Han Feizi and Xunzi have similar views on human nature, oftentimes they appeal to really a byte cycle, kind of secular circular argument, right? So the argument tends to go, okay, Han Feizi must have studied with Xunzi. How do we know this? Because they have the same view of human nature, right? But then if you ask them, why do you think they have the same view of human nature? The answer is because Han Feizi studied with Xunzi, right? So I think that's the first thing I like to say. We don't know whether Han Feizi studied with Xunzi for sure. Even if he did, whether Han Feizi learned his view of human nature from Xunzi, it needs actually, it demands us to look at their views closely before we can make any judgments. Okay, and that's what I'm going to do in the following. I'm going to look in particular Han Feizi's view of human nature and see if it's really similar to Xunzi's view, which allegedly is the idea that human beings are born to be bad in the sense that we're profit-driven. So on the surface, Han Feizi seems to have this view. So I put a line in Chinese from Han Feizi, chapter 48. 8 principles. So in chapter 48, the very opening line, Han Feizi said that in order to govern the world, 天下, right, all under heaven. So in order to govern the world, we have to follow the fact or the natural disposition of human beings, right? Then what is the fact of human beings? The fact of human beings is that we have likes and dislikes. Therefore, rewards and punishments can be used. Right, we reward people with what they like and punish people with what they don't like. This way, we can motivate people to do things we want them to do. Right, so that's his line. So basically, he's saying that political institutions should be based on rewards and punishments. Why rewards and punishments can be effective? Because human beings have likes and dislikes. Right, but here he's not very clear about what likes and dislikes are. Right, in other places. He become quite clear. He said that what people like and dislike. They like profit. They hate physical punishments, right? And of course, when he said this, he says he used the term "min." Min. Sometimes people scholars say min means the masses, so it doesn't mean all the people, right? Only the masses. But in some other passages, clearly he said. He used the term 人, which means all the people, right? He said that people are going after safety and profit, and they avoid harm and danger. That's the fact of all human beings, right? So far, it sounds like Xunzi, right? Who think that we human beings are by nature profit-driven. Okay. However, here we already see a crucial difference between Han Feizi's view and Xunzi's view, because in the passage I just quoted from chapter 48, he said that in order to govern the world, we need to follow the fact. We have to follow what people are, right? Although Xunzi said that human beings are born to be bad, born to pursue profit, right after this claim, he said that the fact that human beings can become good is a result of human effort. So although Xunzi think that we human beings are bad in the sense that we're profit-driven, yet he thinks that this is very bad for society. In order to produce a good society, we have to change who we are. We have to change from badness to goodness. However, Han Feizi in this passage where he apparently offers a similar view of human nature to Xunzi, if you read it closely, he said that we have to follow this fact. We cannot change it. So we already see from the very beginning a crucial difference between Han Feizi and Xunzi on human nature. Han Fei think that we have to follow this nature, whereas Xunzi wants to change this human nature, right? That's the first thing I like first point I'd like to make. Secondly, if we read the Han Feizi in its entirety, we see that in some places, Han Feizi acknowledge the possibility that we human beings can be good to each other, right? So in the passage, he mentioned a story where a magistrate felt bad for punishing a person, and then the text explains that the reason the magistrate felt bad is the result of his heavenly nature, which is the heart of humanism, a humane heart, 人心, 人 being the Confucian concept of humane benevolence, right? So here, apparently, he acknowledged that we have this heavenly inborn nature, which is good, which is caring for the compassionate for the suffering of others, right? And of course, this is from a chapter where he collects all sorts of stories, so it doesn't necessarily represent his own view. However, in another chapter, in a chapter where he tried to offer probably the first commentaries on the Laozi, the Dao De Jing, he said that what is humaneness, benevolence, right? Benevolence is what comes from the inside of our heart, the care for other people, and this care leads us to feel happy about the good fortune of other people and feel bad about the bad fortune, the misfortune of other people. And this is something we cannot really control. And we feel bad we feel good for the other people, not because we want to appease other people. It just a very natural reaction. So here, clearly, he said that we human beings also, in addition to being profit-driven, also have this inborn, natural, uncontrollable kindness toward others, right? And then related to this, in the Five Vermin chapter, chapter 49, he said that in the fall of a good harvest, right? So what he means by in the age of plenty, right? One will have a lot of things, right? One have a lot of things. What will happen to us? He says, even a stranger, we would even treat a stranger with a good meal. So clearly, we have this inborn goodness. So if we have a lot of things, we wouldn't mind give things even to a stranger, right? So that's this inborn goodness. And because of this inborn goodness, also in chapter 49, he said that in the good old days, right, men don't have to work on the field, and the women don't have to produce clothes, right? And why? Because there are too many things around, right? There are very few people, a lot of things. And as a result, really people are very nice to each other. We live in a very harmonious society. So in all these passages, he seems to acknowledge the possibility that we can be kind, even compassionate, caring to others. Something Xunzi never acknowledged, right? And so in this sense, he came pretty close to Mencius, who has really the opposite view to Xunzi's view of human nature, right? Famously, Mencius argued that human beings are born to be good, right? We have this inborn goodness. And Han Feizi here seems to also acknowledge that we have this inborn goodness. Maybe Han Feizi's inborn goodness is not as strong as Mencius, but still he acknowledged this idea. Xunzi never did, right? And so I think that's one important correction of the view that Han Feizi believed that all human beings are born to be bad. He acknowledged that we can be good. So in a way, we can even imagine that Mencius died way before Han Feizi, and so Han Feizi never met Mencius. But we can almost imagine, even if Han Feizi were challenged by Mencius, he would come away unscathed, right? Mencius, in order to show human beings are born to be good, this inborn goodness is universal. He offered, what I would call a very good thought experiment, right? How does he show that we all have this inborn goodness? He asked hypothetically that what if you suddenly see a small child who is about to fall into a well, right? He used the image of small child. Small child always carry the image of innocence. So it's very hard for any people, to witness the suffering of a baby, right? He used the image of baby. He also asks you your immediate reaction. He asks you, what if you suddenly see this, right? Your immediate reaction. Also, he asks you your emotional reaction. He didn't ask you whether you would save this child. He just asked you whether you would feel bad if you see this. So it's very hard to say no in this thought experiment. So in a way, I think the argument for the inborn goodness of human beings is really a very strong argument. It's really difficult to say to reject the argument. And Han Feizi here basically, Han Feizi is really probably the harshest critic of Confucians, but still being a harsh critic, I think he's very smart here. He accepted something he really couldn't reject, the inborn goodness of human beings, right? And however, then he said that although we have this inborn goodness, unfortunately, this inborn goodness is extremely fragile, right? Couldn't resist any test, any serious test. So before the line, he said that in the fall of the good harvest, namely in the age of plenty, we treat even a stranger with good meal. Just before this line, he said that, however, in the spring of the famine year, right? In the famine year, in the fall, you might still have something, but in the spring, nothing is left, right? So basically, in the age of scarcity, right? So in the age of scarcity, even my little brother dies, I wouldn't share with him any food, right? So in this line, very powerfully, he argues that this inborn goodness of human beings is too fragile to be useful in a large society of strangers, right? And so in terms of his view of human nature, so far, I think what I'm trying to show is that his view of human nature is actually closer to Mencius than to his alleged teacher Xunzi, because Han Feizi acknowledged this inborn goodness of human nature. It's just that he thinks that this inborn goodness is too fragile, right? But then, of course, people then say, of course, then you see the difference, right? Mencius think that this inborn goodness is the foundation of a harmonious and virtuous society, whereas Han Feizi rejected this idea because he thinks that this inborn goodness is too fragile, right? However, if you read the Mencius carefully, I think Mencius' view is not that far from Han Feizi's view, because Mencius also argued that, or believed that this inborn goodness of human nature is rather fragile, right? Famously, Mencius said that the common people can only have virtue if they have property, right? Namely, if they don't have enough material things, they wouldn't be virtuous, right? I think what's implied that really virtue is really a fragile thing. Without sufficient material support, at least for the common people, maybe not for Junzi, the morally superior people, the common people, the masses, they need material support in order to be virtuous because their inborn goodness is too fragile, right? And another passage, he said that in a bad year, the children who are born from bad year tend to be very violent, right? Here again, he acknowledged the fact that material conditions can eliminate or at least cover up this inborn goodness, right? So there's another passage he's basically argued to the same effect. So I think Mencius also acknowledged the fact that this inborn goodness of human beings, though universal, is nevertheless very fragile. So in that sense, actually, the difference between Han Feizi and Mencius is not that great. It's just that maybe Han Fei put it in a more nasty manner. But I think deep down, their view of the fragility of human goodness is not very far apart. So the true difference between Mencius and Mencius and Han Feizi is something I already mentioned, namely, although for Mencius the inborn goodness is very fragile, and precisely because it is very fragile, we need to cultivate, we need to grow our fragile inborn goodness. So in this sense, Mencius and Xunzi are actually not very far apart, and probably that's why both of them are considered to be Confucians, because both Xunzi and Mencius believe and emphasize on the idea that we human beings need to be made good, and we can be made good, right? Namely, we can be made good through moral self-cultivation, right? So I think moral self-cultivation is a key idea for early Confucians. And Han Feizi, from the line I read a few moments ago, already reject that idea. Rather, he said that instead of changing who we are, we need to follow who we are. So in this sense, his view of human nature is closer to Laozi's view of human nature. Of course, the Laozi Dao De Jing, we have Alan Zhang here, we have really experts on Taoism here. And so, but in my view, really, Laozi offers, the view that we human beings, human nature is kind of simple. The word pu, right? The uncarved wood, right? So we human beings are kind of simple, and in our simplicity, in our innocence, we human beings are good, right? However, when it comes to a well-connected society, our desires are driven wild by all those bad people in the world, right? So then the ideal solution for human ills is for us to somehow enter a society where there are only small states with very few people, small and isolated states. So these states don't communicate with each other, right? The image that is offered in chapter 80 of the Laozi, right? So in that sense, Han Fei's view of human nature is actually maybe closest to Laozi's view of human nature, namely our inborn nature is simple, innocent, in the sense of innocent, almost good, right? I think another important idea from the Laozi is that instead of changing who we are by human effort, we should follow who we are. We should be natural, right? Be natural means follow who we are, not change who we are by artificial human effort, right? So in that sense, I think Han Fei's view probably is closest to Laozi's view of human nature, or the Huang Lao school's view of human nature. Among Confucians, his view is closer to Mencius, not to his alleged teachers Xunzi's, right? And there's also not, because of the fact that Han Fei have acknowledged this inborn goodness of human nature, there is another crucial difference between him and Xunzi, right? Because Xunzi, for Xunzi, we don't have any inborn goodness. As a result, in his version of the state of nature, so if there are no institutional, political, social arrangements, because we are driven by profit, even in the state of nature, we will try to kill each other in order to gain profit. So basically, his view of the state of nature is very much similar to Hobbes' view of human nature, a war of kind of a state of war of all against all, where everyone is miserable because it's a war of all against all. It's kind of jungle, right? So I think that's Xunzi's view of the state of nature. However, because Han Fei's believe that we have this inborn goodness, and in the age of plenty, this inborn goodness is good enough for society, for people to live peacefully with each other. That is why, according to Han Fei, in the good old days, in antiquity, where there are only few people but a lot of goods, people can live peacefully with each other. A vision Xunzi totally rejected, right? For Xunzi, without external regulations, we can never live peacefully and harmoniously with each other. However, just kind of footnote here, I mean, Han Feizi acknowledged the possibility of a kind of a almost an autonomous, peaceful human state. He acknowledged the possibility of this, probably not out of goodwill. Rather, we know that for Confucians, for early Confucians, including Xunzi, mentions much more so. Xunzi and Mencius all argue that the solution of today's chaos comes from returning to the good old days under the sage ruler Yao and sage ruler Shun. Especially under the sage ruler Shun. The sage ruler Shun doesn't really do anything. He only tries to make himself a good example or good moral exemplar. And as a result, everyone behaves well, and so people live peacefully with each other. So that's the Confucian, especially Mencius ideal, right? These kind of good old days. And Han Feizi, by acknowledging the possibility of these the good old days, he actually offered explanation why Shun's moral leadership could work. So his explanation is that it's not really his moral leadership. It's just that people have too many things. And as a result, because they have this inborn goodness, when they have too many things, they can be very nice to each other. However, following that line about the good old days, he also said that, but unfortunately, due to natural population growth, nowadays there are too many people, too few things. As a result, people are competing with each other, and our inborn goodness, because it's really fragile, it couldn't really bond the society together. So on the one hand, he offered a historical explanation of why in Yao and Shun's times people could be peacefully with each other. On the other hand, through this explanation, he also rejected the Confucian ideal to go back to the good old days, to go back to the time of Yao and Shun. And another kind of footnote here. So in this sense, Han Feizi is perhaps a true one of the very first political scientists and historians, right? Because Mencius and a lot of warring state thinkers, preaching thinkers, use history as the source of normativity, right? What happened in the past, what sage rulers did, offered the norms for what we ought to do, right? That's a very typical way of thinking for a lot of warring state thinkers. But instead, Han Feizi, took history not as something, the source of norms. Rather, he took history as a subject to be explained, right? So that is why I said that he is perhaps the first political scientist, at least in Chinese history, and the first historian in today's sense of historian and political scientist, right? So now we already see a rather complicated view of human nature by Han Feizi, right? But he doesn't stop here, right? So he thinks that we have this inborn goodness, but it's really too weak to do anything. And what is much more reliable in human action is our pursuit of profit or the avoidance of harm, right? However, in another passage, he said that although we are in today's term, we are all rational, right? Rational in the sense that we calculate the profit and harm, and then make a rational decision about what we do, right? So although we are all human beings are rational, yet among human beings, the masses, the majority of the people, they are rational only with regard to their short-term material interests, right? So in chapter 50, he said that really, the intelligence of the masses is really useless. Is useless because their intelligence is their IQ, their intelligence is almost like the IQ of a baby, right? We know that sometimes we need to apparently harm the baby in order for the long-term good, right? Sometimes we have to force a baby to take really bitter medicine in order to cure the baby's disease, right? And a very caring mother would force feed this baby some really bitter medicine, but the baby doesn't understand that the mother is really doing something good for him or for her, right? Instead, the baby would have very hateful reaction to that mother's action, right? So I have two kids myself. They grow up now, but when they were young, I experienced quite a few scenarios like that, right? When I was trying to give my kid, say when I was trying to hold him because so that they could take some vaccine shot, right? And they were crying and they were cursing at me, right? And Hamid said that, but really the masses are just like those babies, right? And he mentioned a few so-called historical stories, right? There are a few wise rulers who try to do good for the common people. They are long-term good. For example, building a dam so that there will be no flooding in the future, right? When they try to do things like this, because they have to force people to build the dam, right? And the people can only understand their short-term material gains. And as a result, they hate the ruler for it. They hate the ruler for forcing them to build the dam, which is actually for their long-term good, right? So in this passage, he further elaborates on his view of human nature, namely, although we are primarily driven by the calculation of profit, gain, profit and harm, yet for most people, they can only calculate their short-term material benefit. And only the few can calculate long-term benefit, right? And so in a rational bureaucracy, right, we need to promote those who have merits, those who are competent. So why we need to promote those who are competent? Because rulers need to do long-term planning. Unfortunately, according to Han Fei's view of human nature, only the few can do long-term planning. That is why we need a kind of bureaucratic structure to identify those who can do long-term planning and make them members of the management class or the ruling class, right? So that is why we need a kind of bureaucracy. We need a kind of bureaucratic hierarchy to identify those who have more intelligence than the average Joes, right? So that's a further elaboration on his view of human nature, right? Then, moreover, in addition to a profit and the inborn goodness, right? In addition to these two drivers of human action, right? The pursuit of profit and this inborn goodness, Han Fei also acknowledged another possible source of motivation of human action, which is honor and shame, right? So in many places, he said that really, if the ruler wants to manage people, right, regulate people, how do you? So as the title of my talk, right, how you herd, right, manage the masses, right, and how do you manage them, right? In order to control them, use mostly rewards and punishments because people are mostly driven by the pursuit of profit and avoiding the harm, right? But secondarily, you also try to manage people, hurt the masses through honor and shame, right? Because honor and shame are secondary drivers, secondary to rewards and punishments, but much stronger than the inborn goodness, right? And of course, in an ideal state, you want to make sure your handles, right? That's the word actually. That's literally the word he's using. You need to make sure the handles you use to control people, you need to make sure those handles are in line with each other, right? In addition, the pursuit of profit, people also pursue honor. So you want to make sure that what is considered honorable is also rewarded, right? What the person who is punished is also shamed, right? So this way, the control, the herding of the people will be most effective. Okay, so to put all this together, now we see that his view of human nature is that we are primarily driven by profit. Secondarily, we are driven by honor, glory. We're using another term. We human beings are vain. We have vanity, right? Vanity is an important driver of human actions, right? And the least effective driver of human action is our inborn goodness. Right. So in that sense, if you have to find a comparison, I think his view in a way is pretty close to Jean-Jacques Rousseau's view of human nature, right? Because for Rousseau, we have this love of ourselves, right, which is this kind of rational decision, rational choice, right, based on material gains and losses, right? And so human nature, first and foremost, we have this self-love, self-interestness, right? And also we have vanity, right? And lastly, we also have a pity, right? So in terms of the three elements of human nature, Han Fei's and Rousseau actually have pretty similar views. So I think here, finally, we have a kind of complete picture of Han Fei's view of human nature. So it's not a simple, profit-driven view of human nature, right? And then just a little bit more clarification here. Sometimes Han Fei think that, our pursuit of honor, usually we care about our material interest the most, our vanity second. But in some cases, for some people, our sense of honor can overcome our pursuit of profit, right? So he says something to this effect. And also in a place, he mentioned the story where a general was trying to help a soldier by sucking, a wound of that soldier, right? And the soldier's mom heard about this, and she was very saddened, right? Because she knew that, her boy, the soldier, would die for the general, because the soldier was moved by this general's gesture, right? So the soldier, out of this sense of honor, sense of camaraderie, sense of really kind of a sense of being a buddy with the general, right? He would rather sacrifice his own life for this sense of for this kind of vanity, right? And so in some cases, we human beings would die for vanity, right? I think probably a story better known in the West would be the story of Achilles, right? Achilles would rather die, sacrifice his immortality in order to defend his glory, his honor, right? And so there is this possibility. However, the general idea Han Fei has seems to be that although sometimes vanity can become even stronger than the pursuit of profit, yet vanity is something we couldn't control well. So the ruler should stay away from using vanity or using a sense of honor to encourage soldiers to do things. Primarily, the ruler should use material rewards and punishments, right? But then, in spite of his rather dark view of human beings, right? So basically, for him, we human beings are not so much different from pigs, right? We're just rational pigs with a sense of vanity, right? Pigs don't have vanity, right? Pigs are going to go after material gains without any sense of shame, right? And we human beings are slightly different. We have sense of shame, right? And we're also rational. We can calculate what would get us the best gain, right? But still, we are just rational pigs with a sense of vanity, right? And so it's a rather dark view of human beings. However, I think an objection from Confucians would be, okay, but there are a lot of people we have heard in human history who would die, who would sacrifice the most important material interest for some kind of cause, right? For virtue, right? For honor, in the case of that soldier, right? What about those people? And Han Fei's response to this question is that, first of all, a lot of people are doing those stupid things, right? Sacrificing their own lives. And that's because they are deceived. They're not rational enough. They're deceived by, say, Confucian scholars, right? Confucian scholars brainwash them into believing the idea that sometimes to be virtuous, to be honorable is more important than your own life, right? So his response is, first of all, in most cases, people are brainwashed by the wrong kind of scholars, right? But then there are, people like Bo Yi and Shu Qi, two people who would rather die than violating their moral principles, right? So what about, these two, right? Very few people who are truly who are true believers in virtue, some moral cause, right? What about those people? And according to Han Fei's view of human nature, these people just cannot exist, right? And when Han Fei talks about these people, he seems to acknowledge that maybe these people do exist. Namely, there is one more correction by himself on his view of human nature. So what I have said so far about Han Fei's view of human nature only applies to the majority of the people. So Han Fei doesn't exclude the possibility that there are the truly few, right? Maybe one or two in each generation who could die for a moral cause willingly, not because they are brainwashed, deceived by some Confucian scholars. There might be some people whose inborn goodness is so strong that it can overcome material temptation, right?
5 minutes.
And yeah, okay, thank you. Then if you're Confucian, you will say, okay, these are the people we should identify. We should make these people rulers, those who would do the right thing over all sorts of material considerations, right? Han Fei's response is that because his ideal institution, namely bureaucracy, rational bureaucracy, is built on rewards and punishments. And rewards and punishments are effective because most people bow down to, right? Follow rewards and punishments, right? However, there are the truly exceptionally few, right, who don't follow material interests, right? So in his ideal state, a bureaucratic state, these people would be the disruptors of order, right? Therefore, he said that even if there were these people whose inborn goodness is so strong, they could do good things in spite of their material interests. If there were such people, what the enlightened ruler should do with them? His answer is very simple: kill them, get rid of them, because they are the disruptors of order. Because for him, order is built on rewards and punishments. Okay, and I think that's about what I would say about his view of human nature. Right. So there's one more thing. Let me just mention it very quickly. So in this picture I just gave you, it seems that for him, both rewards and punishments are equally effective tools of motivating people to do things. However, in many places, he seems to pay much more attention to he seems to pay much more attention to punishments. then rewards, right? How do we make sense of this? And so there are a few very detailed issues involved. But I think one important lesson from his unbalanced use of these two handles, rewards and punishments, I think his unbalanced use of rewards and punishments suggests another important correction of his view of human nature, namely, we human beings are, as I said, we have inborn goodness, but it's not very effective. We have a sense of vanity. It is very effective, but not as effective as our pursuit of profit, right? But in terms of pursuit of profit and avoidance of pain, right? In terms of pain and pleasure, in terms of these two motivators, right? Pain is more effective than pleasure, right? So oftentimes, Han Feizi can be compared with, say, Jeremy Bentham, the utilitarian thinker. However, Bentham said that pain and pleasure are two equally sovereign masters of human life. Whereas if we read Han Feizi closely, Han Feizi seems to believe that in terms of the material drivers of human action, actually pain is more effective and more useful, therefore, than pleasure, right? And this view actually is in line with recent psychological studies. The idea that bad is stronger than good, so-called negative effect of human psychology, right? So this is like one more subtle point about Han Feizi's view of human nature. Okay, so I'll just stop here. I'll listen to your critical remarks. Thank you.
Okay, as usual, I'm happy to start establishing a queue on Professor Bai's behalf. And I suppose also, as usual, I'll be taking hands from the live audience as well as the Zoom audience. So those on Zoom who wish to participate, if you could use the raise hand function, that would be ideal because it tracks who has raised it first. And then if you wish to have your comment read, you don't want to say it yourself out loud, you could type it into the chat for when the time comes. And I'll try to alternate between the live audience and the Zoom audience with respect to the queue. So I see you raising your actual hand, Ellen. There's the raise hand function also on Zoom itself.
I don't know how to use it.
Oh, I see. Well, that's okay. Yeah, I have you noted, so it's
okay.
It's no big deal either way. But for those who do know how to use it, it would save them some trouble. Anybody from the room? Okay, well, I can certainly come back to people. So right now, then, it looks like, Ellen, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you. Okay, hello, Tongdong. So nice to see you here.
Yeah,
online.
Likewise.
Yeah, I enjoy your talk. Actually, I agree with some of you said, but I do have some questions to ask you. And I agree with you that, of course, there's a difference between Xunzi and Han Feizi in terms of human nature. And obviously that it's very clear that Han Feizi was very skeptical about so-called moral contingent hypothesis, as we see in the analects, or like even mentioned notion of 四端 多 spots. And somehow, I see Xunzi still talk about how you can have this so-called moral transformation, which is, as you said, and rejected by Han Feizi. And then he back to this notion of punishment and reward. So do you think that, are you suggesting, you didn't use word, but can I say that in some way, Han Feizi, according to Han Feizi, it is better to seem good than to be good? Because, through this system of rewarding and punishment, people can behave good. And that's good enough for Han Feizi's right to maintain social order. So in a sense, as long as people behave good or seems to be good, that will be okay. So he doesn't care whether they're really good or not. Or maybe he's even questioned this concept of being good. So that's my first question. And the second one, Also, you talk at least Han Fei's think that human nature is constituted by this notion of self-interest. But I don't know, when we talk about self-interest or like even the term egoism or self-centricism, whatever the words. But some people, scholar today, talking about psychologically, they use the term universal egoism or so-called universal self-interest, which means that when I admit my self-interest, also I defend the other people's self-interest. So you do see that people still, they talk about people still can maintain a kind of social collaboration, but still acknowledging this fact that each person is self-interested. So you see that in Adam Smith's argument when in the Nation of the Wealth. But Han Fei's, I don't know if Han Fei's accept that notion of universal self-interest. But of course, he gave a twist back to this legal thing. It looked like but when you say legal, it's not like it's still like a little bit too strong. It's kind of like in a sense, it's still like at least he does not just trust these basic impulses or self-interest that can lead to good. Like my interests also can extend it to my pain to the other people. It looks like he's not that optimistic on that. That's why he emphasized the importance of law, particularly in terms of punishment when people really doing something bad. My last question dealing with your argument that we see similarity between Han Fei's and Laozi in terms of human nature. I'm a little bit suspicious about that statement. It looks similar. I know that also Han Fei also in a way admire Laozi, but in terms I do not find this statement, at least in Dao De Jing, to say that human nature is self-interested. Or even the idea that it is human nature and to like to be rewarded and to avoid harm. A kind of argument made by Morse. I don't even see that kind of arguments in Dao De Jing. So still, can you clarify in what sense? I mean, you talk about, they talk about follow the human inclination, but I think Dao De Jing's notion of inclination might be a little bit different from Han Fei's. I know that you use the word Huang Lao. Probably you're right in terms of Huang Lao, but I want to back to Dao De Jing. Do you think Laozi also suggests the idea that human nature is such that he or she wants to get a reward and avoid harm? Thank you.
Okay, so should I start answering question, or should we collect questions first?
Can you repeat your question?
Should I answer the questions right away, or should we collect a few questions and then
I see.
answer them?
No, you're free to go right away. I'm still surveying for others who will enter the
Okay.
queue.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and so the first question is about whether Han Fei care about whether other people are truly good or just appear to be good, right? The age-old philosophical issue between appearance and reality. I think Han would say he doesn't care about what you think in your own heart. So as long as you behave, then that's all he wants. So he doesn't want to change people's minds, and he just wants to use rewards and punishments to make sure people behave orderly. That's all he wants to do. And so kind of like a footnote here, so in chapter 49, infamously he argued that we should try to get rid of books and intellectuals, including actually himself. I think that is really the theoretical foundation of the burning of books in the Qin dynasty. And oftentimes the burning of books in the Qin dynasty is compared to the burning of books by the Nazis. But I think there is this crucial difference, because for Han Feizi, he doesn't want to change people's minds or change people's virtues. So so it's just that, if you have too many people who read books, but reading books doesn't really produce anything, in his view. Therefore, we should not, have too many nerds, like us, right? Running around. And but in the case of Nazis, they really want to change people's minds, and they think, certain books are dangerous, are bad. And that's why the books need to be burned, right? So going back to the question, so I think for Han Feizi, he only cares about the external results. So in that sense, you could say he's a kind of consequentialist. So that's on the first issue. The second issue, I mean, he thinks that other than Bo Yi, Shu Qi, those truly virtuous Confucian sages, right? Most people are self-interested, so he can acknowledge these facts. So in that sense, he's not far from, I guess, Adam Smith. However, I think there is a crucial difference. I think Adam Smith or most modern thinkers in general define the good of the state as the good of the people, whereas Han Feizi is only concerned with the good of the state. But the state belongs to the ruler, so good of the state or good of the ruler. To him, that's the same thing. Still, he would argue that if the state is orderly, people actually will benefit as well, right? So, but that's not his primary concern. But just a byproduct, right? He would say, by the way, if the state is orderly and prosperous, common people will have a better life as well. And also the way he motivates common people to do things is not to tell people what to do. Rather, he motivates people through institutions. And institutions are built on rewards and punishments. So he's designing that institutions should be designed in such a way that what out of each individual's self-interest, calculation of his or her own self-interest, whatever is good for the individual is also good for the state. How could that happen? You make that alignment through institutions. So in that sense, he has this kind of strange version of of invisible hands, right? So the state doesn't demand people what to do. Rather, a state controls people through institutions, finally through people's own calculation of self-interest. And so in that sense, he has his own version of governing without taking any action, which is this kind of, you could say, Laozi's or Huang Lao's idea. And actually, Han Fei's idea, I mean, the general governing without taking any action idea later, 逮料无为, right? Later was translated into French as laissez-faire, and the very term that also become part of the English language, right? And the translator is a French physiocrat, and the French physiocrats later actually influenced Adam Smith. So I think that there are clear differences between Han Feizi and Adam Smith. Still, actually, there is this really hidden connection, I think, between Han Feizi's ideas and Adam Smith's ideas. So in spite of all the apparent really disturbing ideas, actually there's something rather modern and even benign about Han Feizi's thought. And finally, about Laozi, I think I should be clear. And I'm not saying that Han Feizi is close to Laozi in terms of the belief that human beings are self-interested. And I'm just saying that his view that we have this inborn goodness, right? And but if you look at how he describes this inborn goodness, it's not that kind of strong kind of compassion dimensions. It's almost like the kind of innocence. So I'm saying that in terms of good innocence as goodness, he's kind of close to the kind of picture of human beings in the Laozi, right? Just without all these bad elites, driving the masses desires wild, right? The masses, the common people could live peacefully with each other, right? And so that picture, I think, is quite close to Laozi. So his inborn goodness is not exactly Mensch's idea of inborn goodness. It's more like this inborn innocence by the Laozi. And also, I think another important point of contact is this idea of following, right? You follow the natural tendencies of human beings. You don't try to change them. I think in that sense, I think probably his influence, where he find a kindred spirit in the Laozi. Of course, the Laozi, as I mentioned a few times, there are at least two totally different philosophical approaches to Laozi. One is the Huang Lao approach, right? More kind of political approach. One is the Lao Zhuang approach. It's more kind of a almost postmodern hippie kind of approach to Laozi. Probably I shouldn't say this. I saw Hans Georg is here as well, so no offense to the Lao Zhuang interpretation at all. So yeah, so that's what I meant. The similarity between Han Feizi and Laozi. This inborn innocence and the idea of following the natural tendencies. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. I said I would alternate between the live room and the chat, though so far looks as though the chat is monopolizing a bit. So I think I'll just continue in that way then. We have a question in the chat that I will read on all of our behalfs. So the question is as follows. Dear Professor Bai, thanks for your sharing. You said it's more likely that Han Feizi believes human beings are born good, just like Mengzi, but I'm still confused and cannot persuade myself into thinking that way because Han Feizi proposed and implemented cruel legalism, which emphasized authority, strict administration characterized by heavy punishment and laws. If humans are good in nature, why not give citizens more freedom to create a harmonious and civilized society? It seems that the so-called goodness in nature is too fragile to recognize for me. Could you give me more evidence regarding your argument?
Right. So I think you already, I mean, the person who asked the question, probably you already gave the answer yourself, because although there's this inborn goodness, Han Feizi also believe that this inborn goodness is too fragile. So if human beings are left alone, this inborn goodness wouldn't be sufficient for them to live harmonious with each other, especially when the material challenges are severe, right? When we have a lot of things, we could be very nice to each other. Han Feizi could acknowledge that, but when we don't have many things, our inborn goodness is too fragile to hold us together. Then we need something stronger, which is rewards and punishments. I think that's his view. So his view of human nature, I think, directly leads to the kind of regime he proposes. In contrast, although Mensch also think that our inborn goodness is fragile, he believes that we can make it strong enough to hold society together. And still, it's not really through every citizen making the inborn goodness strong enough. Rather, I think for Mensch, it's just that if everyone make their inborn goodness a little bit stronger, but still it's not strong enough to hold society together. But then some Confucian moral exemplars, Junzi, right? They can cultivate their morals much stronger than the masses, and they are the ones who become leaders or rulers. So that's the Confucian version of meritocracy, right? So in a way, I think all warring state thinkers proposed, other than Laozi, I guess, and Zhuangzi, proposed some kind of meritocracy. And so in that sense, Confucian and legalists are not very different. So they don't believe that human beings, individuals by themselves can produce this ideal harmonious society. We need leaders. We need people with merits. It's just that Confucians and Han Feizi or legalists have different understandings of what should be counted as merits, right? And so I guess because he has this really pessimistic view of human nature, he rejects this idea. I guess one last thing, I mean, his institution sounds really cruel. still, in his defense, I would say, maybe he's really very cold, reward and punishment-based institution. If you have a choice, would you like to live in today we call a failed state, right? Libya, Syria, that kind of state, even Iraq, or a state that is orderly but has no really kind of human touch, right? I guess an example would be like Singapore, right? That's actually part of Han Fei's criticism of this kind of Confucian harmonious society. His criticism, one of his criticisms is that before you can have this harmonious society, you have to have a virtue society, a free society. You have to have an orderly society first, right? And if Han Fei were alive today, probably he would say the reason there are so many tragedies in those failed states is that especially the Western countries try to impose an ideal state on those failed states, but those states don't even have order. How could they have ideal order? You want to impose ideal order on the failed state, you will make the failed state continue to fail, right? So I guess that's. And that's the kind of defense. It might sound very cold, even cruel. Still, that kind of cruelty is better than the state of nature, right? Or some kind of failed states. Okay, thank you.
Okay, next we have Hans-Georg.
Sorry to
hello.
give a comment. Yeah.
No.
Hi.
Hello. My remark is similar to the previous ones. Maybe just a suggestion how to address this also previous question. You say that Han Fei agrees with Mengzi that humans have human nature is good, but maybe it could be slightly modified by saying Han Fei agrees with Mengzi's description of human psychology, but basically refrains from making a moral judgment about it, right? So Han Fei is ready to acknowledge that humans have certain forms of emotional sympathy for one another and have certain actions of, caring for one another, a tendency to that. But then he doesn't really put it in a moralist framework and therefore draws very different conclusions from Mengzi. So he might be agreeing with Mengzi's descriptions of human nature, but wouldn't refrains from drawing moral conclusions from this. You know what I mean? So he might say, it's just like you said, he reacts to history, right? He looks at history from a very descriptive perspective and doesn't really put it in a moralist framework, but much more like pragmatic analysis. And maybe we can say something similar regarding his position on human nature, that he's willing to take over some of the descriptions that Mengzi gives of this without necessarily sharing the moralistic interpretation of it.
Yeah, so so I think that is why I think he's more like a political scientist than a moral philosopher in that sense. But still, I think two things here. First of all, I think although he never mentions Mencius, but I have a kind of intuition that I wrote a paper in Chinese. I think he somehow takes Mencius really as his target of criticism. So in that kind of understanding or speculation, it's almost kind of a very vicious move he made, right? So he wants to give Mencius a fatal attack. In order to give Mencius a fatal attack, he acknowledged the beginning point of Mencius, right? Because if he rejects Mencius' fundamental assumption, it's really a kind of external, very weak rejection, right? But his objection or criticism is rather, okay, let's assume we human beings have the inborn goodness, as you said, right? But I'm still going to show you that why your ideal world couldn't come into existence through your method. So I guess, there might be some intentional. He's using Minshe's kind of quasi-Minshe's view of human nature. I guess that's first point. Secondly, yes, he's a political scientist. He's a kind of very pragmatic thinker. He actually, I think he just wants to save his own very weak state of Han, right? So he's a kind of patriot in that sense. But still, I guess, in his criticism of, in his hidden criticism of Mencius, he could say, I think he's saying that, okay, even if I accept your moralistic outlook of the world, right? So ideally, the best world is a world where people are very nice to each other, right? And the family is harmonious, and the subject and rulers are nice to each other. So even if that is the moral goal, right? Even if I acknowledge that moral goal, still, what I'm trying to show, and what Han Fei is trying to show, is that your method cannot get you to that moral goal. Instead, actually, my method, the so-called cruel institution you Confucians despise, actually will get you to the ideal, to your ideal. And he said that in chapter 14. And also actually in the 解老 chapter, in the interpreting law chapter, he said that those who don't understand governance will always say my proposal is very cruel, very harsh. But they don't see that through my proposal, right? Through this kind of rational bureaucracy, when you encourage people to produce more, so the state will become strong, and the military will be strong, and as a result, actually, people will become wealthy as well and have a lot of honor, right? And so as a result, actually, everyone is better off in my regime, right? And so everyone has a lot of things, and then if everyone has a lot of things, as I said about human nature, then people can be nice to each other. So if my ideal becomes reality, then we will produce a society of a lot of things. And in a society of a lot of things, people will be nice to each other. And also because the whole state is very strong, so no country dares to attack our state, right? So in that sense, we will be so every state will respect our state. No state will dare to attack our state. So we not only are we going to have a harmonious society within a state, we are going to have actually a harmonious world as well. So in that sense, of course he does. I'm not sure how sincere he is about this sort of rosy picture, but I think at least he's trying to say that even if there is such a moral ideal, my approach actually is much more effective. Actually, it's the only possible path to that ideal world. In contrast, actually, because he said, in contrast, you Confucians are trying to be lenient, benevolent to the people, but if you're nice to the people will be lazy, they don't work hard, they will commit crimes, and as a result, they will be poor, the state is poor, and then, in this kind of very challenging condition, nobody would be able to remain nice to each other, right? And so in that sense, I think he has a rather strong argument with regard to this kind of moralistic picture. Namely, even if you accept this moralistic picture, your approach is the wrong approach to follow. My approach is actually a better approach. So in that sense, my picture is even more benign, benevolent, moralistic than yours. I guess that's his claim. But again, it might be just really an attack on Confucians. Yeah. So, thank you.
I am not seeing any further questions. James, we have time for precisely one more, I think.
Okay. Thank you very much, Professor Bai, for your very interesting talk. And I learned a lot, especially you make call me attention to the distinction between the Hanfei's Mencius and Xingzi on human nature. So I think that's really have some significant difference among them, rather than we traditionally think in those very simple way. And also you even challenge or doubt some kind of pupil-teacher relation between Hanfei and Xingzi. And my question will be, I have two questions. The first, I noticed that you try to make distinction between, or maybe I will say you use two terms. One is 人情, another is 人性 in Hanfei, the human disposition and human nature. But later it looks like you use them just like the same. But I would like to ask that to me, the 人情 or the human disposition, as your description or interpretation, looks like more the psychological description or sociological description of the real situation of the being. Or human nature, maybe in Mencius or 人性, in this debate between Confucianism, within Confucianism, like Mencius and Xingzi, look, now even start from more psychology, but also maybe close to more more metaphysics, and this ontological term. So in that way, you try to argue that the government policy, according to Hanfei, should be based on human disposition rather than the human nature. Yeah. So if that is the case, of course, then your argument makes sense to me. And then my question, the first question would be, what's the real relationship between here, the human nature and human disposition, or 人性 and 人情 in Hanfei? Did Hanfei really deal with that, or try to make some kind of explanation of the relationship between these two? Okay, because you also think that Hanfei he's not really against the Mencius, the view of or ontological view of the human nature. Yeah. The second question, if the government policy should be based on the psychological or sociological human disposition, and then if that give a chance to, or make some sense to argue for the view, then democracy or meritocracy are just a luxury practice for the Chinese people, like that, like Hanfei described, because they did not deserve it. We have this kind of human disposition as a real fact. And is that, can we see that as Hanfei's conclusion? If Hanfei asked a question about democracy. Okay. So
if I could interject.
Yeah. How do we argue about the democracy or even meritocracy, like in the ideal Confucian view of ideal society or government? Okay.
And I would just say, in the interest of time, Professor Bai, if you could perhaps try to choose one of those questions to answer.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Actually, I also forgot that in my own talk, I also prepared some criticisms of Hanfei's view of human nature, but because I was running out of time, so I didn't go into this. So I think that being a philosophy professor, I think my job is whenever I'm presenting something, I try to give it the best defense. But I think there are problems with Hanfei's view of human nature as well. But I guess I can answer these two questions very quickly together. So I think Hanfei doesn't distinguish between qing and xing, the disposition and human nature, because for him, what's nature? What's human nature? Xing, right? It's just our natural tendencies, right? By nature, we tend to do certain things, or maybe there is a stronger sense of xing, namely something that cannot be changed, right? And so our pursuit of profit is both our inborn tendency, also something that is hardest to change, right? So So I guess he uses indiscriminately, and so to him, I guess I think what's behind your Professor Wang's question is really, I think for Mencius, Xing also had this kind of ontological, I would say probably normative sense, right? So human beings are not just distributively good. Human beings ought to be good. But for Han Feizi, you don't talk about oughts, right? You just follow what human beings are. You don't try to change human beings. So the very idea of normative, right, ought versus is already something I think he rejected. So in essence, probably that's why he for him, Qing and Xing mean the same to him. But then if that's what we are, right? So clearly for him, democracy is impossible. Actually, he doesn't. Of course, he didn't talk about democracy, but he said that really those who appeal to the people, actually their policies tend now to be really good for the long-term benefit of the state, even all the people together. Actually, in a way, he raised more directly one objection to the democratic regimes. And so in that sense, the Confucian meritocracy by sort of virtuous rulers, right? For him, that's not likely either. He has some additional criticisms as well. For example, look at Confucius. He lived 73 years old. He lived a long life. He worked very hard. Someone like him only came about every 500 years, right? Even he could only win over 70 pupils, right? So how could you think it's possible to have thousands of competent and virtuous bureaucrats running a state? So I think to him, that kind of meritocracy is also impossible. So I guess that's his response. Of course, whether that's true or not, as I said, I have my own reservations with his views as well. But I guess we don't have time to go into it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Bai. And if everybody, both online and in the room, could join me one more time in thanking Professor Bai for his time.
Okay. Thank you
so much again. And for those present physically, as per usual, we will have some light refreshments downstairs. With that, thanks again. Thanks for being here, everyone.
Yeah, thank you. And Ben, I can give you an address. You can deliver some of the things to me. Okay, thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.